All right, good morning. Welcome, everyone. Thank you for joining us for our Not My Major panel on this lovely Saturday morning. My name is Melinda Valente. I'm the Associate Director of Alumni Engagement for Emerson College. And we have a really great event for you today, brought to you by our LA network, our LA Alumni Chapter here. And moderated by Mark McCune. I'm going to turn it over to Mark, who will get things started. And thank you all so much for being here. Take it away, Mark.
Thank you, Melinda. As Melinda said, this is a panel that we put on behalf of the LA alumni community. Ross, Gerard, and I co-chair the alumni development position, where we try to put on events like these for the sake of the specifically the LA alumni community, to provide resources where people can connect, get real practical information from people working in different industries. We try to not just focus on the entertainment industry, and this is a panel that is specifically geared towards people kind of across any place in their career, and we're excited to get going with it. Just quick introductions to get us going. First of all, Ross, my friend, colleague, and co-chair on the alumni committee. He is COO at Campfire, where I also work. And Ross was class of 08.
08, yeah. Well, 09. We graduated in 08, so yeah.
Great. And then let's see, next on the horn, we have Jennifer Howell, class of 96. Jennifer, before coming to LA, was in Emerson and studying mass communications and film, and has since transitioned into a career of philanthropy, creating a wonderful organization celebrating both the arts and focusing on youth and the arts. I'll let you explain more about the Art of Elysium specifically. But she's been doing that since 1997, and now in its 22nd year, the Art of Elysium has been called the preeminent arts charity in LA. And you guys are also based in New York too, right?
New York, LA. New York. Yeah, limited Amazing. Programming and overseas. So got a lot of programs.
Wonderful. Well, we're excited to hear more about that. Next up is Nick Schreiber, class of 09, a classmate of Ross's, no doubt, right? Nick started he was in the commercial and music video industry, but always had a passion for food and cooking, and transitioned his way to create at least my favorite restaurant in all of LA. Nick can tell you about the amount of money that my family probably spent during the pandemic at Belle's Bagels in Highland Park, the #1 spot for bagels on the West Coast. And then we have Roger. Roger was a classmate of mine. Roger is now a political organizer and communications aide. He specializes in speech writing, media training, and outreach. And he started a political consulting organization called APH. Most recently, it helped elect Alaskan congressional candidate Mary Peltola, which you may remember was a highly publicized race against Sarah Palin. He also worked on the Bernie Sanders 2020 presidential campaign, and has been in that industry for several years now. So excited to have you all here. Thank you for sharing your time and your wisdom. But I'd love to just kick it back to you, Jennifer, and we'll go through and just let each of you kind of start about what was your original focus when you started at Emerson, and what was kind of the first thing that made you say, oh, maybe there's something different I want to do with the rest of my career?
Well, whenever I went to Emerson, I went to study film and went in wanting to write and direct. I double minored in writing and philosophy. So I really went in to tell stories. I mean, that was ultimately what I went in to do. And while I was there, I was producing a television show on campus and working. I produced the Evie Awards for 2 years while I was at college. So I got a lot of physical production experience and event production experience just by the Evies and by different things that I did as extracurricular while at Emerson. when I graduated, it was either LA or New York, as most people in Emerson kind of choose between for their career path. And I went to LA, was kind of going on the direction of how do I start writing and directing. And one of my childhood friends relapsed with leukemia. He had been diagnosed our senior year of high school. And my freshman year at Emerson, there was a massive bone marrow drive in our hometown, which we found a match. And he went through a bone marrow transplant, and we believed he was in complete remission. And so because of that, he was a few years behind me in college. And his girlfriend called me when I was out here and said, you need to come home. He's relapsed. And when I went back to Mississippi, he weighed maybe 100 pounds. And here I was starting my life fresh out of college. And someone who I loved dearly and grown up with was facing the end of life. And it just kind of flipped my world upside down. And we went to Memphis for what we believe was going to be his last New Year's. And on that trip, he was like, just don't feel sorry for me. Whatever you do, just don't pity me. I've had friends and family by my side every step of this journey. And then he told me about this little boy who he shared a room with at Vanderbilt, waiting to see if he could go through a second bone marrow transplant. And he said that this little boy's parents were there as much as they could be, but they were juggling multiple jobs and had other children. And so this child was left unattended a lot of his hospital stay. And that was a big aha moment for me. Just, I had never contemplated what these children must have to go through in the isolation of facing life-threatening illnesses or hospitalization as a child. And I came back to LA and got together 23 friends, mostly of who were at Emerson with me. And we went around a table, and it was like, I write, I paint, I do music. And we made a list of everybody's talents. And I went to Children's Hospital Los Angeles with this list of, I've got all these artists and they want to do this. And they're like, yeah, it doesn't work that way. You need to go through a volunteer training program, and you need to commit 200 hours a year. And it was a whole process. And I was like, well, you know, these are a lot of working artists, and I'm not sure that they can all commit to that, but I'm happy to go through the training program. And if they can come in through my kind of volunteer badge. And so that's how we started our first program in August of 97, is I went through the volunteer training at Children's and took in musicians. And then the next week took in visual artists. And so from August of 97 to December of 97, I was going through my volunteer badge at Children's. And then they called me in December of 97. And they're like, we love what you're doing. We love the artists you're bringing in. They're all incredible. It is so amazing for the staff. It's so uplifting. They're genuine artists. We want you to continue, but you can't do it under your bat. Like, it's a liability issue. You're bringing in too many people. They can't come in through you. You can't be insured. And they're like, we need you to start a 501c3. And so I was right out of Emerson with no experience whatsoever in that world. I was just trying to get my friends, who are all artists, to volunteer and help children. And they referred me to an attorney that we share the same birthday. He's been my attorney for 25 years now. And I walk in to meet with him, and he just laughs and he goes, I have no idea why they sent you to me. I'm a real estate attorney. I don't do nonprofit, but I'm happy to take you on. And he literally was like, first of all, we need a name. And that kind of ties back to Emerson too. Melanie Lindahl, who was a few years ahead of me at Emerson, she got me a job at Universal. That was my first job out here. And this girl who I knew for a very brief moment in time, and not that well, but she worked at Universal with Melanie and I, and she had gone to a trip in Boston for work. And she came back from the trip, and she comes over to my little cubicle at Universal, and she's got her hands like this. And she's like, this sounds weird, but I got you something in Boston. Very weird. Like, I did not know her hardly at all. And she said she was sitting in this restaurant in Boston and was overcome. All she said was, I keep thinking Jennifer Howell, Jennifer Howell, Jennifer Howell. And she gave me a pack of matches, and the matches said Elysium, and the restaurant's name was Elysium she was at. And it had the definition, inner sanctum of heaven, basically, where Greek heroes would go to sit at the foot of God. I cried when she gave me the matches and said, I'll name my daughter that one day. And when this attorney said, can you give me a name? I said Elysium. It's the prettiest word I've ever heard. And he looked that up and it was taken. And then we tried several variations of Elysium and we came up with the Art of Elysium. And the rest has kind of just written itself. I would say my experience at Emerson, I could not have created the Art of Elysium without it. It gave me a foundation of art and creativity that is basically in every single part of this organization. We believe in a creator that's greater than all of us, and the opportunity to create and make music, art, right, to transcend these situations that the populations we serve are going through is the only way you can really build heaven on earth. So Emerson and all of the artistic lessons and community and everything I learned at school is very much what this organization is. It's taking all that I knew Emerson to be and coming together and creating and bouncing ideas off of each other. It's that in the act of service. So I very much attribute my time at Emerson, even though it was not my major whatsoever. And I've had to learn all of the 501c3 nuts and bolts. That has been kind of a masterclass and just trying to learn that as you go. But without the foundation that I had from Emerson, I would have never, ever been able to do this.
So that's pretty interesting. That was almost immediately after you got out of school. Nick and Roger, you both had slightly different experiences where you were working in, for several years in kind of the industry where you were expecting, at least at first, your career to be. Nick, what was your kind of journey out of Emerson like originally?
So yeah, I mean, when I was at Emerson, I actually probably my second year knew pretty concretely that I didn't actually want to go into film.
Oh, wow.
Because I was working in restaurants in Boston. I worked at like Zaftig's Delicatessen and Veggie Planet. I also worked in like the Whole Foods, like prepared food section for a while. But food had always kind of had a strong hold on my identity and like what I love to do. So I remember my second year of Emerson actually calling my parents and being like, I think I want to drop out. And they're like, well, what do you want to do? And I was like, I want to go into food. And they were not too pleased with that. They're like, you want to like give up a career in exchange for what is like always going to be a minimum wage job. I mean, in my heart of heart, like, yeah, that's exactly what I wanted to do. But, I think it's kind of wild that we make 18-year-olds kind of figure out what they want to be for the rest of their lives, like immediately out of high school. I mean, when I graduated high school, I was an idiot. Still am. But yeah, I decided to kind of heed their advice and kind of went with it, graduated at Emerson, interned at Partisan, where Ross had actually just finished interning. After my internship, he started hiring me as like production assistant. And from there on out, I worked as a PA and then a production coordinator. While I also Mark interned there too. I have the chat open now. So after my internship there, I worked with Ross for a couple of years and other, producers and all the such. But again, in my heart of hearts, I just knew it just wasn't the career that I wanted to do long term. So in about, I think it was like 2012. In 2012, about 3 years after graduating, I started making bagels for me and my friends. Not really thinking much of it. Just we were kind of going over the lack of bagels in LA. I grew up out here too, so all my favorite bagel shops from childhood had closed down, and I was just like, oh, I know how to cook. I can figure out baking too, which is honestly not the same thing at all. But I started making bagels just for me and my friends, and then over time it just kind of grew. But all the while, honestly, up until about 5 years ago, I still maintain a career in film just to help me finance this I guess passion project. We're entirely self-funded. We have no investors. So, to kind of keep this going, I had to basically work 2 jobs for many, many, many years just to kind of get this off the ground, which is a hell of an experience. But yeah, that's kind of how I ended up out here. I also, I have a Emerson student that's about 12, or an Emerson grad that's about 12 years younger than me, working in our bakery right now because he kind of had the same experience as me. He just did not, animation was not the thing for him, and he just, every time he thought about his fantasy job, he thought about like back to the restaurants that he worked in. And if you like this type of work, you love this type of work, and it kind of has a very strong hold on your identity.
That's really cool. Roger, what was your journey out? Because you were working in television for a little bit before you got into the career of politics, right?
Yeah, for sure. So yeah, my story is a little bit similar to everyone else's, but I originally went to school. I transferred into Emerson. I originally went to school for history and with an idea of studying political theory and history and things like that. And then I grew up in a small town in Connecticut, and on the weekends I was always writing and making little movies with my friends because that's what there was to do. And my best friend ended up going to Emerson, and as I was sort of in this very dry history program at a state school in Connecticut, I sort of got that itch. I was like, I think I want to go a more creative route, and actually, like, I had so much fun, working on these creative projects and writing. Let me make the switch, and so ended up transferring to Emerson, and got really involved in the creative writing and screenwriting world there. I wrote for the Evvies a couple times, helped created one of the first narrative TV shows at the Emerson channel, and did the Kevin Bright comedy projects and things like that. Went and then obviously graduating with a screenwriting degree. It was either New York or LA, or not even really New York. It was mostly just it's LA. So came out here, and I did I followed a similar path to what a lot of folks do, which is I came out here with a pilot that had gotten a little bit of attention coming out of school. It led to some meetings and a lot of coffees, but not to a job. But it was an Emerson friend, an alumni named Danielle, who was working in production for the production company that produced all the that string of reality TV shows like X Factor and America's Got Talent, stuff like that. So that was I basically day played on that, shows like that to pay the bills, and then was always just trying to get my foot in the door in the narrative world and become a writer's assistant and sort of like get onto that track, and that that was just all about persistence. And it just happened to be, I was at an Emerson Halloween party somewhere around 2012, 2013. And I met someone who so that they worked at The Simpsons, and they were looking for a new writer's assistant and producer's assistant. And so then and there, in like a full like Pirates captain outfit, I emailed my resume to them, and then within a week, I was there. I was at the show, and I also had a dual role. Working with Gracie Films, which is the film the film production, James L. Brooks's film side production company. And so, I was in the thick of it. I was doing both sort of like writer's assistant works with, on this very, historic comedy show, and doing a lot of pre-production work for a film that was in production at Gracie Films. So I was really like, wow, if you look at what I was trying to do at Emerson and just get into the thick of the industry, like I'm here, I'm sort of on my path. But there was always this nagging feeling in the back of my head that like Nick and Jennifer have shared, that I just wasn't really it wasn't really the right I wanted to go back to still want to be creative, but I always wanted to kind of stay politically active and engaged in community aid and things like that. So that had always continued a through line in my life, and I ended up kind of doing that more on a volunteer basis as I was making my way through the industry. And then, honestly, things just started getting, the industry started to become a bit of a grind. And I thought I wanted to take a little bit of a break from it. And so I thought, if I, you just come to a point where you just have to make the decision, you got to make the jump, and it's scary. But I made a decision in early 2015 that I had an opportunity. I had been doing some creative writing on the side, which led to some speech writing gigs. And then from there, that ended up getting me an opportunity to go to Iowa to work on the Sanders presidential campaign in 2016. And I took that chance with the idea of being like, let me get this really great experience. Maybe I'll use it creatively, and then I'll come back to the industry. But I had such an amazing time on that campaign. And then, so when I came back to Southern California and Los Angeles, I started working for organized labor on electoral projects, and have just kind of continued on that path, and haven't looked back since. So yeah, that's kind of the story of how I got to here.
Do you each remember that? I mean, it sounds like you've all had to make a clear moment where you're like, all right, this path is I'm taking a step in the completely different direction. Well, and it sounds like, Nick, you were already had your shoes on in college when that was happening. But do you remember like that clear moment? Was it the campaign for you, Roger? Nick, was it I know you were hosting like backyard bagel things, and Jennifer, it sounds like maybe it was hey, you got to do this training if you actually want to do something. Was there a specific moment you each remember?
I mean, for me, yeah, I mean, I think once we started hosting these like pop-ups, and then we got like our first little bit of press about it, that's when I was like, oh, this is actually a viable idea. And once I realized that it was something viable, that was when it both kind of clicked for me, and I was like, okay, I'm going to actively pursue this. But it's also, for me, it was like the most terrifying moment of my life, because it was like realizing what I had was a good idea, then the entire onus of its success was on me, because it's just like when you have a good idea and there's demand for it, then it's just like on you to figure out how to make it work, which is kind of terrifying but kind of exhilarating. But yeah, I think after our first or after our fairly large backyard pop-up, and this was in like a world pre-food pop-ups. Like it's not like what we have today where everybody's doing pop-ups. We didn't know what we were doing. It was very it was kind of a no man's land. But yeah, that's when we were like, all right, well, I got to actively pursue it. And we ended up renting a small space from an existing bakery and pursuing a 2-month long pop-up where I mostly didn't work in the industry. I was working like overnights, baking and stuff. But here and there I would pick up jobs just because like I'm a human being who has bills and we had rent to pay and the business had no money. And so like, that was kind of it, other than like, in college, just knowing that I wasn't going to end up here, but I was still going to give it a shot.
Were friends and family supportive at this point in time for each of you? I know, Nick, you said you had that conversation early on in college with your parents where you kind of gave them that heads up, like, this probably, I'm not long for the, I'm going to be in the food industry at some point in my life. But for Jennifer and Roger, was there any pushback, or was there overall encouragement from your friends and family? And was that anything you had apprehension about going into?
I mean, mine was divided. My father was very supportive, incredibly supportive. He was just like, if you feel called, use everything you know to serve others. He was completely on board. My grandparents, until the day they both passed away, what are you doing? Why don't you have a real job? They could never understand that a nonprofit is a real job. Like, they couldn't quite get their head around that. And then they were constantly, spend all this money on this degree. Why aren't you doing what you're supposed to be doing? And they loved me. So I don't want to say that I felt they were punishing me in any way, but they could never quite get their head around why I went to school and got a degree and did not do what that degree was for. And literally on my grandmother's deathbed, are you going to go make movies? Isn't that what you're supposed to be doing out there? So it was a mixed bag. My father was always supportive, but my grandparents just couldn't quite wrap their head around why I went to school and did not do what I went to school for.
Yeah, it was a somewhat similar experience. It was very, my parents were mostly just sort of confused, especially because they co-signed on some pretty expensive loans. So they were just a little confused. But once I was able to, kind of explain to them the day-to-day work that I was doing, that I was still, producing creative content, and it wasn't, while it wasn't, going into production on narrative programs, it's still storytelling at its heart in a lot of ways. And so once I was able to, sort of show them that, there was some pretty easy understanding. Yeah.
Is there any advice that you'd give for folks who might be having to, face some conversations like that, and anything that you wish conversationally you might have addressed differently, or any perspective you can share now, having had that in the rearview mirror for several years now?
I mean, I will jump in since it's been in my rear view mirror longer on this panel. I look at it all. I think we're not our major. We're not what college we go to. We're none of that. Like, we are a combination of experiences, and every experience that I've had has led me to exactly where I am right now. And without deciding to leave Hattiesburg, Mississippi and pursue a degree in film at Emerson College, I would have never ended up in LA, and I would have never been able to just jump in the deep end and figure out how to make a nonprofit happen when I had zero experience in it. So I feel like we're all a culmination of all of our life experiences, and not to put pressure on yourself about what your major is. Go through the process, walk through it, and just know that your path is forming ahead of you. And we try to control it and we try to pick all these things or know all these things. At 18, it's impossible to know. But in your 40s, at 70, at 80, it's also impossible to know. Life throws you curveballs. And I think it's listening to that thing inside of you that just says, this is the way I'm supposed to go. If you feel called to cook, if you feel called to be of service through nonprofit, if you feel called to go into politics, whatever that urge is inside of you, I think the best thing you can learn from any education is to listen to that gut and know that that's the way you're going. And even though I've not technically used the degree I had from Emerson, there was something inside of me that was like, I want to go to Emerson College. And I know that that yearning inside of me led me to where I am today. So even though my major might not match up, it's still very much a part of my journey to be here. And so I would just say to be gentle with yourself if you decide not to go on the career path that you thought at 17 or 18 years old what you were destined to do. I think your destiny kind of unfolds in front of you.
Yeah, I mean, oh, sorry, go ahead.
No, please, Nick.
I was just going to say, you know yourself better than anyone else. Also, your parents are just human beings who have life experience and don't necessarily know all the right answers. My dad, but let me just keep in mind that like my parents are now extremely proud of me and they make it very, very clear at every opportunity. But when I came up with this idea and I was really just being like, you know what, I think I'm going to make the jump. My dad kind of gave me a little anecdote about a friend who followed a passion, and like sometimes in life, you know, it's better not to follow a passion as a career choice because then your passion becomes work, and like that's not always the best thing to do. That was essentially the moral of the story, and he was right. But like it wasn't food for me, it was film. I was like very passionate about film. I loved everything about kind of doing it in high school. I even enjoyed my time at Emerson working on student films. And, you know, I was a crafty guy for quite a while, and it was a very easy job and I enjoyed it. But, you know, that was the passion that should never have become work for me. You know, I still enjoy film, but food was the right choice for me. And I deep down knew that. And I think it's just kind of important to just follow your fucking gut, you know?
I have a question for you. Do you think had you gone to culinary school, it would have unfolded the same way? Like had you known then if you had gone to culinary school and wanted to pursue it kind of through an education that way?
I mean, I think I would have probably just ended up in a similar space, probably a different trajectory of my career. I never really worked in fine dining or had much desire to do so. But yeah, I think had I gone to culinary school, I probably would have had the same experience. But at the same time, you know, one of the greatest things you learn post Emerson, and this isn't to knock Emerson, but like you meet people who didn't go to, you know, film school, but still work in the film industry. Yeah. You meet people that didn't go to culinary school, but still work in the food industry. Yeah. So school, as you said, school isn't exactly who you are necessarily. So like that was one of the more interesting kind of takeaways from this is just like, oh, you know, at any point in your life, you can kind of define and or redefine who you are and what you want to do. You know, your education isn't your personality. It's like a small fraction of it. So
that's really interesting perspective. You were all kind of mentioning like the balance of your passions and having that either, you know, what you might thought have become your career in terms of, you know, a creative field, but now each of you shifting into still equally creative fields, just kind of occupationally different. Is there a balance you have to make with, you know, like if you have a passion for food, you said it becomes difficult when that becomes your work. How do you balance that? And do you still have the same kind of passion that you had for film at the time you had in college, or has that shifted and evolved? What have all of your passions look like, and how do they play into what you're doing today?
I mean, I still love food. Food is still all I really care about. And it's something that to me, it's more enjoyable as as a form of work than I pretty much ever thought it was. Cause like, there's cooking, right? Where you're at home, you cook something, comes out delicious. You're like, oh, this is fantastic. Maybe I have a career in it. But like cooking on a large scale is just completely different, and you have to come up with workflows, and you have to come up with things that you can replicate and that other people can take and replicate recipes, all this stuff. And I actually really enjoy doing that. I like creating something and then teaching people how to do it and seeing them make it just as good as me, if not better. And like that's just really fucking cool to me. So I truly enjoy food as like a profession, because I would imagine that for a lot of people, the passion is much more connected to this like idea of creativity and flowing and like, but like food isn't necessarily always that. At times it's that, sure, when you're in like an R&D phase, but at the same time, when you do that stuff, you have to keep in mind that like you're not going to be the one cooking this. Other people are going to cook this. You have to be able to show other people how to do this, and you have to make sure that it doesn't take too much time. And it's like all these little tiny things, which I could imagine would annoy little people, but I still find them to be very thrilling and exciting. And it's just as exciting today as it was the first day I started making bagels. In terms of film, I do enjoy film. I enjoy watching movies when I can, but my interest in that field has definitely dwindled considerably.
Yeah, I mean, I would say my balance is interesting because I get satisfaction from the creative aspects of the work. What drives me is being able to, write a speech that connects with folks, that synthesizes some pretty complex ideas, that creates a persuadable argument for folks. And when I'm in the room and I see something like that working, or if it's I prepped a candidate for a debate and they do really well, it's those sort of things. It's the same sort of feeling that I got out of writing creative scripts or doing television production at Emerson, to just kind of see a project come to fulfillment. But I, in a lot of ways where people in the entertainment industry don't like the state of the entertainment industry, I also don't, my balance is not, I do not like the political climate. I don't necessarily like electoral politics. I believe can be a useful agent of change to a degree. And so it's something that I have to keep a balance on, because it's an industry where you can quickly start to put the weight of the world and its troubles on your shoulders, and start to think that by having to sit and kind of talk about some pretty tough topics and things like that, it can get pretty overwhelming and kind of seep into your own your own mental health and your own outlooks on your own world and things like that. So I would say like the balance, at least my balance, and what I take out of some of the lessons from Emerson was to just kind of be constantly reminded that that do the work and get satisfaction from the creative work that you're doing, but like we've been saying before, understand that that your job is not who you are as a base person.
Yeah, and I would say for me, it's interesting because in so many ways, my passion has grown. It has grown immensely because of seeing the transcendental power of art. We started with children in hospitals. We work with the homeless community. We work with the elder care community. We're doing incarcerated youth coming out of facilities, like trying to reintegrate them. We're and veterans. To see all the art forms actually help these people transcend what their circumstances are, I think that my passion for art has grown immensely. And where I started with the love of film, we have a culinary arts program. So I'm listening to the two of you talk, and like, I had never had the appreciation for food as this creative art. I never understood that until the charity. And we had different chefs say, I really want to participate. And we started with doing diabetic clinics where we had cooks come in and they taught healthy, this is how you can make something healthy. And watching that craft, I have such a deep appreciation for the culinary arts now. Speech writing, I mean, you are shaping the voice of nations whenever you're putting candidates out there, and it's still creative. I would say that I have fallen in love with the fact that I think by nature, everything we do is art. And, there's this label of, well, this is art and this isn't. And I actually think everything we do as human beings is creating. And so kind of see that power of creation in everything is my greatest passion. And I think that innately is who we are. And I really do believe it's the only way we can heal the world. I don't think it's through anything other than acknowledging this creative spirit that's inside of all of us in everything that we do, if that makes any sense whatsoever.
Absolutely. And I'll be the first to get on the soapbox as we talk about this a lot in the film industry, because, producers get talked about in terms of like, well, they're a line producer and they're a creative producer. And like that whole label of creative producer has always bothered me as someone who kind of straddles both sides, because I think what, functional practical line producers do on a daily basis is inherently incredibly creative. The amount of problem solving you have to do, you have to pull from all kinds of different resources and come up with inventive solutions for situations that oftentimes appear insurmountable at the time. And so I think creativity is obviously a very subjective concept, but it's beautiful that it can take so many shapes and forms from a vocational perspective, that you can express yourself creatively in a lot of different ways. If that's creating a scalable workflow for evolving home cooked food into something you can actually provide as a daily sustenance for people coming to your shop, or like you said, Roger, transforming something that was a skill you developed from writing narrative long form screenplays into the television world, and now into actually trying to change someone's mind on a stump like that. You're using a lot of those creative elements that were kind of originated in a different form and are now being exercised in a different way, which is a really beautiful thing that we all have that kind of mechanism inside ourselves to be able to do that. So I love that perspective. I think it's very, very cool. And it's neat to see it uniquely in each of you too. And I know we're talking kind of about like the shiny outcome that you all have gotten into these, very successful places where you are now. I want to talk just a minute, going back a bit to the transitional period of where you were between things, where you were making that choice to leave. Just for the sake of people watching or maybe listening to this later on, for people who are in that place now, what kind of wisdom or advice can you give them to kind of endure? I know you've already talked a lot about like, trust that path in front of yourself that you're creating, but when you're stuck in the mud of it in that transition period, I imagine it can be a little daunting. You can have a lot of doubts. You can question a lot of decisions you might be making. Is there any perspective you can share, like from that transitional trench?
educate yourself
Sorry.
as you do it. It's like the transition. I would say for me with the charity, I was reading Nonprofit for Dummies. I was going to the nonprofit center downtown and learning on the fly. And it's a different type of education to build your own business or to build something, as I'm sure everyone on this can attest to. You know, there are practical things that if you don't have that background and just compliance issues with businesses and stuff like that, it can be completely overwhelming, but there's so many resources out there. I was like a freshman in college again. I'm going downtown to the nonprofit center almost like it was a library, asking all these questions and just trying to figure it out. And don't be afraid of what you don't know, I guess would be the best thing I could say. Is if you feel called to do something, there are ways you can figure out all the practical sides to make it work. And just don't be afraid to learn as you go. That would be my advice.
Yeah, I definitely agree with that. You know, in the food industry, it can be kind of hard to get into it because you can come in as like a dishwasher, work your way up, a prep cook, and work your way up. But like, if a person comes to me and they're like, this is what I want to do with my life, I have no experience doing it, but I want to learn, I would be hard pressed not to at least take them in for what we call is like a stage, is like the term we use. It basically means unpaid internships, but I also don't believe in unpaid internships, so we pay people for their time with us. But pretty much any restaurant will take a stage in if you express interest in working with them or learning the process. So there's always that as like a way to kind of break the ice and get into the culinary field, because it can be hard at times for sure. The other part of it that I think I struggled with a lot is post-college. You know, you're like, I just spent 4 years of my life studying this one thing, and 4 years feels like an eternity at that point. But the older you get, the shorter 4 years actually becomes. And it's just like, I started this bagel shop 10 years ago. And if you told me that it was going to take me 10 years to, or I started this bagel concept 10 years ago, if you told me that it was going to take me 10 years to, or I guess 8 years to land my first like actual commercial lease with a storefront, I would have been like, there's no fucking way I'm doing it. But in retrospect, the time flew by. So it's just like 4 years seems like a long time, but nothing is going to happen fast. And that's totally okay. It should happen slow. If things happen too fast, like that stymies your ability to really grow and embrace what you're doing. So I'm a pretty big advocate of, even if you're not in the field that you want to be in and you want to pivot, like it is going to take time, and that's okay. And don't let that frustrate you or dissuade you, because like at the end of the day, it'll be worth it, in my opinion.
Yeah, I mean, my advice is sort of in a similar vein, is like, you know, there's never going to be a perfect time to be 100% prepared to make that switch. And so you just have to sort of make that decision and practice some, as you move into that industry, I would say practice some radical honesty. And just as Nick was saying, you know, with, you know, people coming in and just saying, this is what I want to do, you know, and just have, you know, just like be right down the line with folks, you know, about that. Now coming from a perspective of somebody who has a company or who has done a lot of hiring, has been a manager, campaign manager, things like that. I'm much more interested in hiring folks who are honest about knowing what they don't know and being open to learning, than I am someone who's trying to fake it or to try to be, overly impressive with credentials and things like that. So like it may seem like you're moving into an industry and with just sort of wide-eyed and I don't know anything, no one's going to take me seriously. But I think I can speak for everyone here that everyone has been at that point at in their lives or in their professional careers, and I can say it's refreshing when someone comes to the door and says, look, I'm just going to be honest, this is something that I don't know, but I want to learn, and I'm willing to learn, I'm willing to put the work in. That's not as common as you might think it is across a lot of industries.
We have a question here from Karen, and certainly encourage all of you to ask a couple questions as we're getting towards the end of the conversation. If you're curious about a certain career path, what is the right way to go about researching it, talking to people who are in those positions now? Are there resources or other good avenues that you've all been able to find to educate yourselves?
Yeah, I mean, for sure, I would say hitting up people that are working in your industry is a great idea. The way I got started was, I had a pretty good career in cooking, but I knew nothing about baking. And back in 2011, in what I will call the first wave of bagel revivalists, there was this bagel shop in Oakland called Beauty's Bagels. And I just shot them an email, asked them if I could come up, work with them, see how they do it. And they said, of course. And now years later, I get hit up all the time from people that are starting bagel shops or want to start bagel shops. And they're like, how do I take the first steps? And, I'm more than happy to provide people with the knowledge or experience that I had. I think most people who, most people who work in any industry are pretty willing to tell you everything that they know. If this is not an example of that, then I don't know what it is. But yeah, I mean, and if they don't, then you don't want to fucking talk to that person. That's my opinion.
Yeah, I mean, I would say that at least in the sort of the electoral field, or even if you're thinking about going into, a mutual aid or anything like that. Luckily, someone's always running for something somewhere. So there's always, or unluckily, so there's that element of, you can certainly meet with, at least in my particular field, there's always folks open to chatting and kind of getting an understanding of the industry and things like that. But at least in the particular field of electoral politics and policy, there's always open positions at the local level and at the local, state, city level, where they need sort of boots on the ground organizers, and they'll teach you the art of electioneering, and then if there's a certain field in that world that you want to become a part of, most of the department heads are always looking for sort of their next their next deputy or intern or junior staffer or stuff like that. So yeah, that's my advice from my the scope of my field.
Yeah, from me, I researched a lot, and I agree. I just think that if you ask, I definitely think it's probably field specific into the best way to find people. For me, the resource center for nonprofit was beyond helpful. That was I lived there for the first few years of the charity, just trying to educate myself on everything I didn't know. I mean, it really was a second degree, but I think that there are resources, depending on the field, that you can find. And if it is something like a nonprofit center, where that is specifically what they are there for, use it as much as possible. And then ask. I think even if someone says no to you, if you don't ask, you don't know. So anyone that you feel like can lead you towards what your goal is, ask them for advice, ask them for help, ask them what they know. Most people, I agree, are really willing to share their knowledge if someone's really curious about questioning them about it.
I'd also be remiss not to say the Emerson community obviously has a lot of people, even just on this panel alone, but a lot of people willing to share their interests, willing to lend a hand. I know a lot of you probably engage in immediate communities, but the Emerge platform does have ways to specifically look for whether it's similar shared interests, industries, majors, and you can flag it on your profile if you're there to help people or there to be a sounding board or be a resource for other people. So if there's something specific you're looking for and you want to start within the immediate alumni community, you can look there and see for, look for people who are already raising up their hand and saying, hey, I'm ready to talk. I'm here to at least provide an initial conversation or maybe point you in another direction. And I know that I've had that experience with people within the immediate community and within my industry as well. Before we start wrapping things up, one last question for each of you. I've always been told, doubt your doubts. Here you are, you've each made a, relatively big transition in some point in your life. Do you anticipate anything else in the future that might change? I know, Jennifer, you alluded to this, that, 70 or 80 years old, you don't know what kind of curves life is going to throw at you. Do you guys have things that you're focused on in the future, things that we can be looking out for, and other ways that we can support the endeavors that each of you are doing now? And is there anything that, maybe you're already in a new transition phase and looking to jump into something different now? Are any of you in that phase now, looking to start something new again?
Yes, we're in, I know it said 22 years because you got the bio off of our website, which needs to be updated, but we just celebrated 25 years in August.
Congrats.
So next year, we just decided to kind of get through this year because of COVID and everything's still, figuring everything out. So next year, we're really celebrating the big 25th anniversary and using that to focus on expansion and really look at how to scale the charity across this country and hopefully into international programs that can help communities through art. And we're also, during COVID, we've started and we're pretty deep in it. We are working on an online curriculum program that we're trying to get accredited from your freshman year of high school, basically through college, that has all of the disciplines of the charity. So art, fashion, film, music, culinary arts, dance and movement, and philanthropy, where you're learning from people in those fields what an actual career path is in those fields. So it's this is very similar to this project that we're in the midst of. And we're very blessed. Shepard Ferry's our creative director. We have the platform built and we're in the process of taking that out right now. So that is our next big adventure, is trying to figure out how to get arts education to people who otherwise growing up don't have access to art.
That sounds amazing.
So that's the big one for us right now.
Yeah, I mean, I think that the pandemic in and of itself kind of put everyone back into a transitional phase. Just because it really kind of redefined how certain industries worked. For us, we actually lost our lease on our previous space because the building ended up getting sold. We had opened up a bagel window in Highland Park and served out of there for about 4 years. And then, they asked us to pay an exorbitant amount of money to stay. It was basically them just bluffing us out of there And so we ended up finding the only restaurant on the street that wasn't occupied, and we were able to work out a deal with the previous tenant. And we ended up in this massive space, which we never really wanted. But because of that, now we've transitioned from just doing bagels, and we're getting ready to open up a full Jewish delicatessen in 2023. So like,
Hey,
yeah, which will be fun. I never really anticipated doing this. There had been a concept, kind of brewing in my head 3 or 4 years ago, but this was not something that I planned on doing when I first got into this industry. It's something that I'm very excited about doing now. But yeah, I mean, I think everyone hit a bit of a transitional phase because, even the job that you had known for, 10 years changed a lot in the last 3 years. So for better and for worse, but hey, we're resilient, right?
Yeah, amazing.
yeah. And speaking of curveballs, like whoever expected the pandemic, that was a
Yeah.
curveball. That's what I mean. It's like you never know what life's going to throw your way.
Right.
And I think if these past 3 years have taught us anything, it's that. I mean, this was out of the blue and everyone had to pivot and rethink. And I think kind of it's, the phoenix comes from the ashes. I think burning everything to the ground and having to figure things out and shake it up is that constant kind of resurrection is what is the testament of humanity, that hope and figuring it out as you go and not being attached to anything, whatever plans you made, like they can be taken in a second. And I think that is the kind of grace we have to strive to have. It's very hard, but to strive to have, to be willing to kind of be nimble and pivot as the wind blows a little bit.
Yeah, to that point, at least for me, the week before shutdown, I was, at a 9,000 person rally in Detroit with Senator Sanders, just in a room of that many people, not really knowing what was coming. And then 5 days later, I'm locked in my bedroom for 2 years, and it's a massive change. And my career as sort of I became sort of a journeyman communications aide. So I was traveling all over the country, sort of like in a gun for hire situation, kind of on all different races. So I was traveling all over the place. But what I learned from that travel and then kind of got into deep conversations with over COVID ended up being what my new venture is, which I've been at for a little over a year now. Was in my travels, me and a few other coworkers kind of saw the state of working in progressive politics. There are a lot of voices who have some good ideas but don't have the financial resources to run good campaigns or run successful campaigns, and part of that is because there are financial barriers to the institutional knowledge that a lot of electoral workers have, and so over COVID gave the lockdown gave me the opportunity to collaborate with some of my former coworkers, and out of that came this consulting firm, which is a group of like-minded progressive political organizers, who we like to say we flip consulting on its head a little bit, in that we work within the confines of a campaign's budget initially, and we help them get pointed in the right direction to revenue streams and our institutional knowledge on how to build a campaign, because a lot of what we saw when we were traveling the country was there were folks who could get a campaign up and running, but they wouldn't answer the phone for less than $7,000, $8,000, $9,000 a month, and that's just wasn't a sustainable working model to try to get progressive candidates elected. And so it was you know, to the point of, you know, the lockdown made me realize, like, okay, this is bad. I can't do what I normally do, which is travel the country. And I got to figure something else. I got to figure something else out. And just kind of similar to what we talked about all day, all afternoon here. It was just a matter of you know, knowing that the change, knowing that, like, accepting that the change was going to happen and something was going to have to you know, develop out of it, and just making that jump and figuring it out, build the plane while you're flying it, basically.
It's amazing though that you've been able to do it.
Thank you.
Yeah, and each of you building the plane while flying it. I like that. I've also heard that, you know, these different industries described as your Tarzan swinging through the jungle, and you're grabbing for vine after vine and hoping that each one's pulling you a little bit forward. But I just want to thank each of you for your time. And a reminder, this conversation is going to be up on the Emerge platform. So for those of you, well, if you've made it this far and you weren't one of the few people here, then you already know where you found it. But I want to thank you each for your time and your wisdom. It's certainly encouraging to me, and I'm sure to our audience here and in the future. And just appreciate the perspective from each of your unique journeys here. It's helpful for all of us to see, and I think it's encouraging, no matter what field you're in, to have a little bit of inspiration that even in moments of being stuck, you can find a way through it and find a way forward, and you don't have to necessarily be beholden to decisions of the past to get you to a future that's going to give you something to look forward to every day, and to give you something that can help exercise the passions that you have. So thank you, each of you, and please reach out to Melinda or connect with me on Emerge if you guys have any other questions or for future updates on these kinds of panels. And please give us some feedback. We're going to be throwing more of these in the future, and we definitely want them to be tailored to the needs of the community. So please let us know, keep us posted, and we'll see you all next time. Thanks, each of you.
Thank you so much.
Yeah.
Bye.
Take care, everybody.